If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. Let me explain. Anchor has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. When hosting on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. And best of all, Anchor is totally free. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hi, I'm Kaylee, a college student and pretend journalist who was conceived with donor sperm in 1999. This is Message in a Bottle. Hi, welcome back to Message in a Bottle. This is episode 7, my conversation with Peter, who is donor conceived and an author. His new book, Uprooted, is available everywhere, and the links to everything are in the episode description. Peter and I talk about his story of late discovery, finding out that he was donor conceived right before he turned 50, and how that led to over 2 decades of research into the history of assisted reproductive technology and how that kind of resulted into his book. But I will let him tell his story. But before we do that, I just want to say thank you for everybody listening and everyone who's listened. It's been really cool to hear from people who had no idea about sperm donation or any of this before hearing some of these episodes and these conversations, and they've told me that they've learned a lot and found everything to be super interesting, and so I love to hear that. And it's also been great to hear positive feedback from people who are in the community and have said that these conversations have been helpful for them. So thank you all for listening, and don't forget to follow the show wherever you are listening to this so that you will be notified whenever these new episodes come out on Thursdays. Okay, with all of that said, here's Peter.
Hi.
Hi.
Let's see if I can figure out how to start this video. Here we go.
Oh,
Here we are.
there you go.
How you doing? Nice to meet you.
I'm good. How are you? Good to meet
Alive
you.
and well, thanks. You're in sunny downtown Vermont?
Oh, yep. Beach weather. That's
So
awesome.
what year are you in UVM, Kevin?
I am a senior.
Very
So I'm
good.
graduating in May.
Well, I majored in psychology as well, but I did it for the wrong reasons.
What do you mean the wrong reasons?
My dad committed suicide when I was 16.
Oh, wow.
So I went there. He had problems, depression problems, and he was hospitalized for the last 4 years of his life. And old school Italian family that he was in, it was all hush hush, don't talk about it. It's a reflection upon them. Maybe they're flawed too. And they pointed fingers of blame to find scapegoats for the issue. Again, old school Italians. So I majored perhaps to figure out what was wrong with him. I never did, but I found my own passion in terms of group psychology, the dynamics of organizations, leadership, psychology, and so forth. I use that in my career as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I was reading, you have a book that's older, right? That's about that type of stuff, like group.
That's right. How to get a company out of a jam. And if you use the principles of leadership soon enough, you'll keep out of a jam.
Interesting. Yeah, business psychology kind of.
Yeah, right.
So it became relevant.
Yeah. Well, relevant. Yeah, I was. You could use that in any organization, whether it be a for-profit or not-for-profit type of an organization.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it was organizational leadership as a principle.
Yeah. Cool. I don't have any super specific questions. You can kind of just feel free to explain kind of like who you are, where you're from, and how you found out that you were donor conceived. And then obviously I want to talk about the book and how that became a thing.
Sure. Well, so how did I get to be the person I am?
Yeah. Tell me in
All right,
10
well,
minutes. Yeah.
Well, today I really consider myself an author,
Mm-hmm.
and then an advocate for the rights of the donor conceived, who, to my point of view, have been disregarded by the very industry that enabled the conception to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I always thought I knew who I was and what transpired to make me who I was. Somewhat of a dysfunctional and disruptive childhood.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was sick. I had rather an unstable life. I was in 11 different schools between the first and the eighth grade. I started and finished high school in the same place. State college education, UMass Amherst, first one in my family to go to college, opened many doors of opportunity for me.
Mm-hmm.
On the ground military service as a special operations team leader in Vietnam really shaped my leadership style.
Yeah.
So here we are in 1995, and I'm the CEO of a software company in hot water. And what I did for a living is specialize in companies, high-tech companies that were in hot water.
Mm-hmm.
Hence my first book, by the way.
Right.
And my then 75-year-old mother had open heart surgery and a post-operative stroke.
Oh, wow.
So all of the locks that guarded the gate to her secret no longer worked.
I see.
And it came out when she was in rehab recovering from this stroke that my dad wasn't biological, he was sterile. And I was conceived with the assistance of an anonymous sperm donor in the waning days of World War II, by the way, with the help of a fertility specialist that had a practice affiliated with Harvard Medical School.
I see. So you were how old at this point?
I was 49 years old.
Oh, wow.
So late discovery disruption, and it was very, very disrupting, very traumatic. I always took my DNA for granted. And since my dad suffered from unipolar depression as well, I was very fearful that perhaps some gene had been spilled over to me, or maybe even my children or my grandchildren. So I was very watchful of that and very guarded. And perhaps that knowledge helped shape some decisions that I made in my life. Well, it's confusing and conflicting emotions when you go through that. I was deceived and angry about it and relieved all at the same time. I mean, how can you be happy and sad and have shame and pride, be grief-ridden and exhilarated, feel empty and fulfilled all at the same time? It was very confusing. And what I've learned is that there are many people that go through this misattribution experience that experience the same conflicting emotions. Now, misattributed was something I never even heard of as a word until I started researching this. I knew other miswords, you know, if you're misunderstood or misconceived or a misnomer, but never misattributed. It was an NPE from a non-parental event. And to be misattributed means that your DNA and your birth certificate just don't jive. Something's askew with one or both parents. Now, how can that be? A closed late discovery adoption is a leading case of that. You could be the product of an extramarital affair, or a one-night stand, or maybe an unreported sexual assault. You could be switched at birth, or raised by another family member. Maybe you called Aunt Martha mom and Cousin Mary was really your mom. And that happens in families today. Or like me, in the old days, they call it semi-adopted through an anonymous gamete donor. In my case, it was an anonymous sperm donor. And the experts, in quotes, believe that some 2 to 4% of us are misattributed.
2 to 4 of the whole
2 to
population.
4% of the human race.
Oh my God.
Now, some think it's a little less. Some believe it's a lot more than that. But they'll pretty much agree that 2 to 4%, you can talk about that as being within means within range of reality. Well, this I found very traumatic, the whole experience of my questioning my identity. And my wife and some of my friendship circles suggested that I go to some therapists to help deal with this trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And, in the old days, I've seen it in both the war room as well as in the boardroom. If you're seeing a therapist, maybe you're weak to begin with, and maybe unfit for command. So I was a CEO that needed some therapy. So I kept it very close to myself that I was going to get some help. And I went through a couple of different therapists before I found the one that I really thought was going to help me, who specialized in trauma to begin with and grief. And my first meeting with him was very interesting. He said, son, congratulations, you hit a trifecta. Because when you experience new trauma, this DNA discovery, it rekindles old trauma that you thought had long passed. And I never really properly dealt with the suicide of my dad.
Right.
And never really grieved properly for that. And I had a lot of pent up PTSD from my service in Vietnam. And the sociology at that time, Kaylee, was keep it quiet, don't talk about it. Nobody wants to know. And I don't need anybody calling me a baby killer. So I'll just keep it to myself. That's pretty much what most Vietnam veterans did. So in order to deal with one trauma, I really had to deal with all three at the same time. And I had this thing called genealogical bewilderment raging inside of me as well. Now, genealogical bewilderment, a psychological term from two psychologists in the mid-60s that were studying adopted people that learned late that they were adopted, and they were going over some dysfunction that they had in their persona, feeling like they didn't quite fit in. Where did they belong? You can say that genealogical bewilderment will rage inside of anyone who learns that he is misattributed, or he or she is misattributed for whatever the reason.
Right.
You don't have to be donor conceived to feel genealogical bewilderment, or you don't have to be adopted to feel genealogical bewilderment. And in 1995, when I discovered this, there were no records, by the way, that were kept on all this donor conception stuff. It was very secretive. My mother gave me some clues. She misremembered the name and address of the doctor. I had no place to go anyway.
Where were you conceived, or like where did you?
I was in Boston.
Oh, okay.
Right. Harvard Medical School.
Oh, right. I see. That makes sense.
The internet, by the way, was in its infancy in 1995. Google was 3 years from even being founded. Right. Google started in 1998.
Yep.
And DNA over the internet was 12 years away from its first introduction by 23andMe.
Right.
So the only thing I could do, my only recourse, was to research the living daylights out of the history, the sociological, the scientific, and the legal history of assisted reproductive technology that enabled my conception to begin with.
So you couldn't deal with your specific situation, but you wanted to kind of get a whole rundown of the history of the entire process.
Exactly. And that was therapeutic for me to do that.
Yeah, that makes actually a lot of sense.
So I used the old gumshoe methods of investigation with the help of Boston Public Library and the Medical Library of History inside of Harvard.
I see.
And I looked at it not only from its early biblical references, but right through to today.
There's biblical references?
Yes, I go over that in my book.
Oh, cool.
So two decades of really fervent research. It was like I was a PhD student doing my thesis, but I had a very unique lens of someone who was donor conceived. And I had no answers as well. I was looking for my genetic origin. How about my genetic health history?
Right. Yeah, you didn't have any of that.
And I asked myself, I'm raised as an only child. Do I have any siblings? So the more I learned about the evolution of assisted reproductive technology, the more I was really energized to write, call it an expose from my very unique lens of an industry that has become now a multi-billion-dollar industry with several sub-segments, all free from any sort of federal regulation, whose growth as a multi-billion-dollar industry could attract the likes of Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. And the industry enabled the conception of dozens, if not 100 or more siblings from the same donor with nobody's knowledge.
Right.
So I had a problem with that, right?
Yes.
And 21st century technology through 23andMe gave me some answers. And I was an early customer with 23andMe, but I found out what I was. I didn't find out who I came from. I didn't find any paternal relatives. But instead of being Northern Italian, I was English, French, and a little sliver of Scandinavian. Okay, well, I can deal with that.
Right, yeah.
But there was no genetic health history and no sibling identification.
So when did 23andMe first come out? 12 years from now?
23andMe was a startup company in 2006.
Okay.
They introduced their first product over the internet in 2007. And Time Magazine in 2007 declared 23andMe the innovator of the year. And by early 2008, I was one of the early customers for 23andMe.
I see.
How much do you think that cost me, Kaylee?
To buy a kit?
Yeah.
I know nowadays you buy them for like $130, something like that. Recently bought 2 of them. So maybe it was something like $50, $60.
$999 as a startup company at the
Oh, right. Okay, that makes sense because it was
right?
so new. That's
Remember,
crazy.
this is a mainframe computer, and it cost about $1,000 now, right?
The iPhone, yeah.
Yeah. In the 1960s, a mainframe computer was in the millions. Now it's $1,000. Well, the same thing holds true with the technology curve in DNA.
Right.
It's gone from a list price of about $1,000 to a list price of about $100.
Right.
Although you can get it on sale on a Black Friday sale for $49.
Right. Yeah, I bought 2 of them recently. Oh my God, that's crazy.
So I did the.
Yeah.
I waited for the database to build up on 23andMe over a 9-year period of time, and I just was not finding any paternal relatives. And my kids put me on to my now adult children put me on to Ancestry.com, who came into the marketplace with DNA over the internet in 2012. At first, they had tools for family trees, automated family tree search with all the records and so forth that they had. And within a 5-year period of time, their database was exceeding that of the early introductory of 23andMe. And they were advertising like crazy. They had venture capital interests, and they were sponsoring the $49 Black Friday sales. So I went off and I signed up for Ancestry.com in 2017. And it was through that effort that I actually discovered a paternal connection.
Oh, wow.
And that paternal connection championed finding the source of my seed inside of her family tree. So now all of my questions are really answered. Wow. Except one. My only open question right now is, how many siblings do I have really?
Right.
And so, there were 6 of us at last count. Now, I'm not part of the frozen sperm generation.
Right, I am. Yeah.
Frozen egg. My parents apparently did not have a unethical fertility specialist who was using his own sperm on his many patients, as opposed to finding a donor. So it's not likely that I have 100, Kaylee, but my question is, how many do I have really?
Right.
Now, February, we're approaching February. That's what we call new sibling season.
February is.
You sign up to a $49 Black Friday special in December,
Oh, I see. So by
or
the
it's
time.
given to you as a gift.
Yes.
And it takes 8 weeks to process
Oh,
the saliva that you put into a vial. So in
right.
February, all of a sudden, another 2 million people or thereabouts that signed up for the Black Friday specials are showing up in the database.
I see.
Now, if that 2 to 4% number holds, 2 to 4% of that 2 million people are going to find out that they're misattributed.
Right.
And how many of them will be misattributed through an anonymous donor?
Right.
Or are they learning they're misattributed through some other means?
Because some people, yeah, I guess it is a thing. It is sort of trendy at this point to sort of take a test, even though you're not looking to figure something out. And then people find out by accident about the paternity or the maternity being
Yeah,
not
well,
what
for
they thought.
$49, it's a pretty cheap
Right.
test.
Yeah, you
So
might as well. Yeah,
you want a
exactly.
$100 sweater or a $49 DNA
Yeah,
test?
of your ethnic breakdown. Yeah.
Let's have some fun. It's the gift that keeps on giving. So when I researched this, though, Kaylee, I was a little alarmed by what I had found in the industry. And my book will detail the industry from its origin to today. And I've got what I'll call the top 10 secrets of assisted reproductive technology that I amplify in some significant detail. Number one,
Oh, I was like, do we get to
artificial
know? I'm
insemination.
glad we get to know.
What's that?
I'm glad we get to know the secrets. I thought that was a
Yeah.
cliffhanger. No.
Well, artificial insemination was actually perfected by an exiled mad scientist that history has nicknamed Red Frankenstein.
I read.
He was a Russian.
Oh, oh.
He was a colleague of Pavlov, and he attempted before they understood the chromosomal limitations of hybrid life. He attempted to create a hybrid man-ape.
Oh, wow.
So I go over the detail of Red Frankenstein. Number two, artificial insemination by husband was actually first alleged in what year do you think?
Artificial insemination, meaning people with male factor infertility using a donor.
No, by husband. Artificial insemination by husband.
Oh, like, oh,
Yeah, 1462 was alleged by a medieval king
oh, wow. So why would he have done that? Or why
uh,
would,
to claim an heir for his throne.
but without having, when you say artificial insemination, you mean not with sex?
He claimed that his sperm was delivered in absentia to his wife,
Oh,
who had a child,
oh, I
and
see.
he wanted to claim that child as the heir to his throne.
Oh, I see.
So
Oh, so that's a long time
I
ago.
go over that in detail. That's King Henry IV
Hmm.
of medieval Spain. It was first documented, by the way, in the 18th century by a physician of English royalty in 1790.
Hmm.
The very first artificial insemination by donor took
Oh,
place in 1884 in Jefferson Hospital in Philadelphia, a medical school,
oh, wow.
under, let's call it was a criminal act inside of a med school. I go over the details of that. At the beginning of the 20th century, church and state just drove insemination, drove donor insemination underground
Hmm.
in a clandestine fashion, in a shroud of secrecy. And I
Yeah.
go over the details of that. The early practice of artificial insemination by donor took a eugenics tone.
Right.
In the 1950s, back to the farm, frozen bull semen actually was the platform that created today's Wild West of gamete distribution that has
But-
now gone off the rails out of banks.
oh
And you can imagine getting a donor over Craigslist.
my God.
In the Western world in the last 4 decades, what do you think has happened to fertility rates?
The last 4 decades.
Down by 50%, 50%.
So people are becoming more fertile or less fertile?
Less fertile by 50%.
Why? Because of just,
Two primary reasons. There's a lot of sub reasons, but the two primary reasons, number one, are environmental factors.
yeah, that's kind of what I.
And number two, people are just waiting longer to have a family and their biological clock isn't cooperating.
I see. So.
All right. But the population of donor conceived people like you and me over the last decade has increased by how much?
Probably a lot.
Another 50% in the last decade. So here you have fertility rates down 50%, and you have donor conception up 50%.
So it's just going to be more and more people.
To highlight the reasons for that. Well, the sociology has really changed. 15% of couples have fertility issues. 15. Half of them because of the man, half of them because of the woman. Maybe 20% of them, it's a combination of both of them. There's less social stigma with going to a fertility specialist today. But you have the old practices of anonymity and the use of indiscriminate use of gametes multiple times, still breeding dozens, if not 100 or more siblings per donor, with the donor conception up 50% just in the last decade. That's huge, huge growth.
That's a lot of.
Now, the 10th secret is really a secret that hasn't germinated yet. And that is, there's an ethical dilemma. Who will be the next Red Frankenstein? Right? You have manipulation of genes using CRISPR technology. The Chinese have already put one doctor in jail for 3 years for doing some gene manipulation. In a research university at Monash University in Australia this past February, they were able to model a human embryo with skin. No egg, no sperm.
But they were able to make an embryo?
Model a human embryo.
Oh, God.
So we're cloning sheep and Cocker Spaniels. It's just a matter of time before this technology, science will advance. So the ethical dilemma is, who's going to be the next Red Frankenstein? So you have a dedicated group of medical practitioners in the fertility field today, and a subsegment of rogues. Let's say the rogues have no laws.
Right.
They just do a shame. You're unethical, but there's no law preventing them or penalizing them. We have expanding science, frozen egg, frozen sperm, frozen embryos, surrogacy, uterine transplants, all multi-billion-dollar subsegments of a huge industry. Social and legal acceptance is much greater. There's 1 million adults today with a 50% growth. The distribution of gametes is my issue with the industry. Egg, sperm, and embryo, with little regulatory oversight. It's the Wild West out there. And that Wild West has gone off the rails over the internet.
Yeah. Because of
so we have industries that are not particularly well self-regulated. That's why we have the SEC and the FDA and the FTC and the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act. We have the National Organ Transplant Act, but in the fertility field, we have a self-regulated industry.
Right. Which doesn't make a lot of sense.
It doesn't make a lot of sense at all. And these gamete distribution organizations are run by merchandising specialists, not medical practitioners. They might as well have Procter & Gamble experience. They could be from Harrods or Macy's or Nordstrom's. There's internet marketing and cataloging and FedEx treatment for immediate shipment and so on. And this is protected from by U.S. law, by protected from competition by U.S. law, by the same act that enables prevents an apple from coming across the the gates in the country.
Oh, an
Organic
apple.
material.
I see. Oh.
Have you ever tried to get an apple through customs in another country? Alarm
No.
bells ring and you could be arrested, for crying out loud.
Really?
So under the same principle of protecting organic material and not allowing the importation of organic material, the importation of gametes is unlawful in this country. So it's a multi-billion-dollar protected industry.
Oh.
Why wouldn't Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan all be thrilled with following that?
Yeah. Oh my God.
And there's an 80-20 rule that I learned in business
Mhm.
about inventory. 80% of the people buy 20% of the inventory.
80% of the people.
Milk, bread, dairy, meats, and so forth are purchased by 80% of the people, and the other 80% of the inventory is purchased by 20% of the people.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So if that's the case, isn't it any wonder that with the 10-year frozen life of sperm, we have 100 or so siblings per donor with
Right.
no registry of finding out who they are?
Yeah, that actually, it makes sense.
So my goal for this book that I put together is to be let's call it a go-to book for the assisted reproductive technology industry, past, present, future, the donors, the recipients, medical practitioners, therapists, legal practitioners, and legislators.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to impact assisted reproductive technology industry practices positively. I'm all for science enabling people to have a family, but I'd like to do so with the notion that there's a Bill of Rights for the donor conceived.
Yeah.
Sure, the donors have rights and the recipients have rights, but
Right.
can you point to me any right for the donor conceived?
Right. Yeah.
So a donor conceived Bill of Rights would have a half a dozen or so key premises: abolish donor anonymity,
Mm-hmm.
do known donor only, and DNA over the internet is basically, as a science, abolished an anonymity de facto anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like,
Yeah. Mandate donor genetic testing,
yes.
and then the disclosure of the health history of the donor.
Mm-hmm. Instead of just the
Limit
self-reported.
offspring per donor and have a real limit of offspring per donor, not a make-believe. Today, there is an association, a trade association, basically, the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, ASRM.
Mm-hmm.
That's in this country. And they're American in name only because they have representatives in over 100 countries.
Mm.
And their guideline is to limit donor offspring per donor to be 25 per 800,000 population.
Right.
Well, let's talk about that.
That just,
if I lived in Sacramento, I'd have 25 siblings using that guideline.
right, because it's about 800,000 people.
If I were in metropolitan Boston, I'd have 125 siblings.
Oh, yeah.
And if I were in a larger metropolitan area, New York City, Los Angeles, I'd have, how many do you think? 250 siblings.
Just based on the, yeah.
Using that guideline. And that guideline is per bank, whether it be a sperm bank or an egg bank or an embryo bank, what have you. There's
Mhm.
nothing preventing some donor from going to multiple banks. So that's a bad guideline, number one.
Mhm.
And there's no law around that. So let's put together good laws as opposed to bad guidelines.
Yeah.
And then establish a sibling registry so that you don't have to feel like a litter and commoditized after you learn you're one of a couple of hundred. How'd you like to date a sibling?
Yeah, that's a big topic. And
how'd you like your children to date their children?
It's definitely possible with the numbers.
Very definitely possible.
I'm sure it's happening.
Require a donor and recipient counseling about the needs of the donor-conceived child on the front end, and
Hmm.
then enact some sort of legal recourse with real penalties and laws for blatant fertility fraud.
Yeah.
And we have all seen recent press announcements and releases about examples, not using a gamete from the bank, but rather the doctor using his own sperm,
Right.
an example. So there are plenty of cases of blatant fertility fraud, not testing, and taking the word for a donor's word for the fact that he is a PhD that speaks 4 languages, only to learn he's schizophrenic and
Hmm.
a convicted felon,
Yep.
and passing his DNA to countless children. So I guess the last goal for my book: speak for the feelings and well-being of all misattributed people, because
Mm.
they all go through the same kind of feeling that I went through, and the same confusion and the same trauma.
Yeah.
Now, my bonus that I got through all of my research, 22 years of research actually,
Hmm.
as an only child, I actually have a couple of siblings that I've developed a close relationship with,
Oh. So
a
they,
very unique friendship.
yes.
Nice people, they resemble me, they share my DNA.
Hmm. So are they all from the Boston area originally?
Originally, yes.
Yeah, that
Originally,
makes sense.
yes.
Because it was a local, right? There's no such thing as national shipping banks back
Mhm.
in when you were
Yeah.
conceived.
Mhm.
Huh.
Well, in 1945, when I was conceived, remember, frozen sperm didn't come to be until the 70s.
Right.
And it wasn't until the later 80s, under the AIDS epidemic, that it actually uh,
The
got traction.
testing. Yeah.
Up until then, they were really using live fresh sperm
Right.
that had a 2-hour life out of the body as opposed to a 10-year life.
Yeah.
So like I said, it's not likely that I have 100 siblings, but my question is, how many do I have?
Yeah.
I don't know.
And yeah, that's the whole problem is that there's never really a way to know for certain. So you found the six or the number that you have now through the different DNA tests
Yes,
over time.
and every February I'm looking.
Hmm.
I don't know how many more will show up. In the first 3 years, I thought that my only sibling was the one that came about as a result of ancestry.
Hmm.
Uh, last last year there was a real burst, and I'm one of 6.
Oh, wow.
Now, many people my age in particular, they don't know.
Right.
It was a shroud of secrecy. They don't know. My latest sibling that I met in February of last year through the Black Friday sales,
Hmm.
75 years old, and was she discovered in the course of 22 hours everything she needed to know, where it took me 22 years.
Right. Right. Because you, yeah, had to start without the internet. Huh.
So that's my book. It's a combination of let's call it a deeply personal, intimate memoir of
Hmm.
my experience in dealing with this, and a tell-all expose about an industry that's just out of control.
Hmm.
But
That's
I'm
an
all for
interesting
science,
combination.
enabling the conception of people to help families have a family. But I'm all for doing this in some sort of a regulated way.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm excited. I'll definitely. So it's in physical copy towards the end of January, right?
Yeah, it's in print now. It's going through the varying distribution channels in order to find its way to the shelves of the bookstore on the 25th of January.
Hmm.
Uh, it was due to be released along the same time as the audio and the electronic book on January the 4th.
Hmm.
But we have this thing called COVID-19 supply
Right.
chain logistical issues,
Yeah.
and I couldn't make the dots connect. And once the plans were in place for the audiobook and the electronic book on the 4th of January, they weren't going to delay that because the printed version wasn't available. So it's been a bifurcated release. The ebook was out last week, and the hardcover book,
Ooh, you have it.
the
That's so
hardcover
cool.
book will be out in about 10 days.
Wow. That's so cool to be able to see your name on the cover. I mean, you have a book before, but that is very cool.
Yeah, well, my name is the same name as the first book.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't
Right.
changed my name.
Yeah. Oh, that is, yes, a lot to find out. You know, you are not the first person that I've spoken to who has had a father, like a social father, die by suicide, which I think is interesting. I don't know if it's related to this sort of secrecy and if that had any impact on it, or if it's just the fact that it's just a coincidence, but it is interesting, and I wonder.
Well, it was very impactful for me to discover at 49 years old that my gene pool was different than I had thought.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I made decisions about my life based upon a willful lie.
Yeah.
My birth certificate was a hoax. The whole process of donor insemination at the very beginning was secrecy, and I use one obstetrician and another fertility specialist, and don't let the obstetrician know, so that he'll put the name of the husband on the birth certificate with no questions asked.
Wow. So your mom eventually ended up explaining it to you. Did she explain? Well, I guess it makes sense as to, like, did she explain why she kept it a secret for so long?
That was the coaching they were given by doctors in society. Don't
Hmm.
tell anybody, that it'll damage the child if he knows.
Right.
Uh, don't let any embarrassment to the infertile husband take
Right.
place. Uh, don't let any notion out there that can be used from a blackmail standpoint.
Mm.
All right. Don't let the doctor be accused of facilitating adultery,
Oh, that's
because this was
interesting
an
that they
adulterous
considered
act.
it.
The law all considered donors conceived children illegitimate.
Mm.
At the time of my conception in February of 1945, Kaylee, there was an article in Time magazine that I surfaced, and it was going over the findings of the ruling, rather, of the Cook County, Illinois Superior Court, where a couple was granted a divorce on the grounds of adultery because of a donor insemination issue, and
Wow.
the child was declared illegitimate. And the title of the article was "Artificial Bastards" with a question mark.
Oh my God.
And they were going over what's the legal status of a donor conceived child. Now, this is near the end of World War II.
Hmm. So it's definitely different now, because I don't think you would. It's different now, but it's problematic in different ways.
Well, it's sociology has changed. 1973, the Uniform Parentage Act took away the title of illegitimate to any child, irrespective of whether the parents were married or not.
Hmm.
In 2002, they dealt with a donor conceived child, and they gave the donor conceived child the same legitimacy.
Mm.
And in 2015, they dealt with that because same-sex marriage was then legalized.
Right.
So they dealt with the fact that the parent was the parent irrespective of the sex.
Right. Yeah, because
And the
my
child,
mom's, they they had to, like, my biological mom was the only one that was on the birth certificate, just because when I was born in 2000, the gay marriage wasn't legal and they weren't married, and
right?
so it was just my mom on the birth certificate, and then when I was a year old, my other mom had to legally adopt me to be added to the
Mhm.
birth
Yeah, right.
certificate.
Yeah. Well, my mother, I asked her about adoption, and she said that their doctor, their fertility specialist, said that the law was really fuzzy about that in 1945.
Hmm.
And if they went for adoption, they're free to do that. But then the cat's out of the bag. My dad is sterile, and the child is not his, and there's all the sociological uh, things.
So you think that you sort of understood why it played out like as it did?
Well,
Did you do it with
intellectually,
anger?
I understood, and
Yeah.
she told me that, well, when I was 21, she was going to tell me.
Mm,
Well, I turned 21, and oh, he's doing fine. He doesn't need.
right.
Yeah,
So yes, I'm excited to
yeah.
read it and to have
But I
that.
go over that in quite some detail in terms of the history, the shroud of secrecy, my mother's mindset at the time.
Yeah.
Well, my website is www.peterjbonney.com, and you can find a link to buy the book on the website. You can go to Amazon. You certainly can go to your local bookstore, which I always encourage, and ask for the book. If
Hmm.
they don't have it in stock, they can get it. My publisher, Greenleaf Book Group, is got worldwide distribution.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Well, I congratulations on the release of the book and everything, and
Oh,
I'm
thank you so
glad.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
22. That's funny. I'm 20. I'll be 22 in February. So your research for the book was born the same time that I was.
Yeah, 1995.
Oh wait. So then
Is when
yeah.
I started in 1995, and by 2017, I answered all of my questions.
Yeah, I
It's now
see.
26 years, so 4
Right,
years
right.
since I've answered my questions.
Yeah.
Um, I decided to write the book for, I guess, in two different waves. The first wave, uh, when I was researching the entire industry, if you will,
Hmm.
I exposed some of my findings to a friend of mine that used to breed Rottweilers.
Oh my God.
And his feedback was, my gosh, there's more regulatory oversight to breed puppies
Hmm.
than there is to conceive human beings. So then I thought, well, this could be a thought-provoking book.
Yes.
But by 2017, once I learned everything that I had learned, that I had about my source of my seed, and the award-winning fertility specialist from Harvard Medical School that
Hmm.
helped conceive me, I was convinced that I really needed to share what I had learned, not only about myself, but about the industry in general.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So I'm talking history, but it's rather interpretive as opposed to very dry.
Hmm. That's good.
And really, for me, the whole discovery was very traumatic. And if other misattributed people are going through the similar kinds of trauma for whatever the reason, they can perhaps relate to some of the trauma that I dealt with, and effectively, I think.
Yeah. That's why. Yeah, I agree. And I feel like the Facebook group has been an interesting thing to read because I kind of come from the similar linking fact of I'm also donor conceived, but I had not realized that a lot of people go through a lot of trauma in finding that out. And I guess I was lucky not to have realized it firsthand instead of, but yeah, I think it's good to have all these different resources
Well,
for people.
you are a poster child, though, Kaylee, for why the psychologists and therapists all say today that the very best thing you can do for a donor conceived child is let it be part of their woodwork when they're growing up,
Hmm.
and without having that late discovery and that trauma that goes with that.
Yes. Yeah, I have only one of my sisters is somebody that found out as like a young adult instead of being told from an early age.
Mhm.
And she definitely feels differently about the whole thing and about the whole group of people
Sure.
than the rest of
Yeah.
us.
These Facebook groups, they're terrific, and that you can to actually have someone that can share some of the feelings and know that you're not alone.
Hmm.
When I learned, it was 1995. Uh, we Are Donor Conceived, for instance, as a Facebook group,
Hmm.
was founded in 2016.
Right.
So I really felt all alone for a long period of time,
Yeah.
and I learned that, wow, there's a million out there like me. Now I'm very unique. I'm one of the older ones.
Mm.
When I was conceived, it was estimated there were 10,000 donor conceived, or rather 10,000 people conceived by artificial insemination, 1/3 of them by donor and 2/3 of them by husband.
I can't get my head around what we were talking about with the 25 siblings per 800,000 people thing. That is just
Yeah, that's per one gamete bank. But here's another statistic that I learned about the gamete distribution. There were 100 or so of these things, and they all consolidated as industries do. Now there's about 28 of them. My last research said that the top 5 banks had about 100 donors each, and they supplied half of the industry's need. Now, when you take that and do the math, there's a birth of, they're estimating between 30 and 60,000 donor inseminated children per year. I just use the midpoint on that, 45,000. With half of the banks providing, with 5 of the banks providing half of the need from 100 donors, works out to about a dozen siblings per year. With a 10-year life of a gamete, 10-year life of sperm, frozen sperm, by the old math, that's 120.
Right.
So there's no question why you can find people with over 100 siblings.
Right.
Now, what if that were in 2 different banks, or 3 different banks, or 4 different banks, or all 5 of them?
It's bad. That's just bad.
It's just bad.
It's just bad.
So hence the donor conceived Bill of Rights provides some sort of law for people like you and like me, give you some kind of rights.
Definitely. I still wonder about my own donor and that whole situation, just because it seems unlikely that there are only 11 of us, just based on the fact that California Cryobank is one of those big international banks, and it was even earlier when there was even the regulations were even more sketchy and whatnot. And the fact that I found this out during the course of this podcast research and stuff, I found out like on the phone with the guy from the bank that he still has vials available today, even though if the lifespan is only 10 years, but this was, this is probably 25-year-old frozen sperm, but it still could be purchased. And that, unlike what you were talking about with 23andMe, it used to be probably $100, and now one of those vials is about $1,000 to buy. So I don't know who would buy it, but it's still possible, and that freaks me.
Yeah, let's talk about the money angle. If I were a donor, a man today, you donate a few times a month for a year, and that's about $15,000 under the table that you earn.
50?
1.5.
Oh, okay. I was like, well.
All right. That's under the table, no 1099.
Mm.
Now, if I were a woman, it's a little bit more difficult to harvest eggs. It's a little bit more invasive. It takes some
procedure
process.
Yeah.
And there's some anesthesia involved too. So I could, as a woman donating my eggs, I could pay off a college loan. I could buy a fancy car, or put a significant deposit on a house.
Yeah.
So there's significant financial incentive as well.
Yes, definitely.
So many countries have some laws and ethics around this, but the United States is continually pressing the free market. And the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, it's a networking organization, a trade association. It provides education for some of its members, but it's also working on public policy. That's a fancy way to say it's a lobbyist.
Right.
All right. And your 8th grade science teacher taught you about inertia being a very powerful force.
Yes.
Yeah. The status quo is a very powerful force. and the
Uh-huh.
industry is huge. The growth is double digit. Why make any changes?
Uh-huh.
So I'm advocating for change for the rights of the donor conceived.
Yeah. I think it's a noble cause. Well, I'm glad we spoke. It was really great to meet you. If you want,
Likewise, Kaylee. What
if
did you
you,
learn about your donor, by the way?
what did I learn?
Yeah,
Well, I, you mean like as a child?
today, right now. What do you know about your donor?
I know, you know, everything there is to know. Like I'm in contact with him and I've met him a few times. And I could text him and that type of thing.
Do you resemble him or do you resemble your mom?
I definitely don't look like my mom or my mom's side of the family. I don't think I look like him exactly, but the sibling group, we all look very similar and all have the same kind of like dark eyebrows and the similar eyes. And I think we look like his sisters and his dad. Um, but yeah, there's definitely a familial resemblance. I could show you a photo.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, inheritance is a complex formula. My son resembled nobody in the family.
Mm,
And through the discovery of the source of my seed and comparing his picture at 18 and my seed's picture at 18, my daughter-in-law looked at that and told my son, meet your grandfather.
yeah.
Yeah.
So he by the time that you found him through um somebody, was it your sister, your half sister on 23 on Ancestry that
I
you
found
found
it
him?
through ancestry.com.
Yeah. So so he was not alive?
No, he had died in September of 1995. My mother had open heart surgery in October of 1995,
That is
and
very interesting.
she spilled the beans in November of 1995.
Huh.
And it was in September of 2017 that I actually finally learned, after 22 years of banging away, the source of my seed.
Huh. Wow. Did he have like a wife and his kids that he
He had a
raised?
wife and two children.
So those are two of your, like, do you
Right.
know do
They're,
you
they're
know
two.
them?
They're two of the six.
Mm-hmm.
There are four others.
Did you ever get to ask them, or did they ever know that he was a donor growing up?
Nobody knew.
Nobody knew.
Nobody knew. It came to light in 2017 when I
When
raised my
everybody
hand.
figured it out.
When I raised my hand and I said, "Excuse me, but I think we're related here. Can
Oh
you help me
God.
out and find the source of my seed in your family tree?" And it all pointed to my donor.
Wow.
Now, I never fantasized personally. I never fantasized about meeting my donor. I just wanted to know who he was, what his gene pool was, what his medical history was.
Mm-hmm.
I never fantasized about going out and meeting him and having a cup of coffee or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
maybe I would have if I were younger too, but I didn't.
Right. I don't know. I think it was curiosity of like, I didn't have a father in the first place. So I think it was curiosity of like,
Sure, yeah. Mhm.
right. I don't know.
I got very lucky because I found a, a champion to
Help you.
enable all of my discovery, as opposed to I encountered somebody that was fearful. Um, I, I, I was afraid I would be like the bastard stepchild trying to find a seat in King's Court.
Mm.
But I was greeted with a lot of receptivity and some help, and I just got lucky,
Yeah.
as opposed to I was rejected right out of the get-go.
Right. Yeah.
So that helped me heal. Really, I just needed to know. It
Mm-hmm.
satisfied that genealogical bewilderment that really was burning.
Yeah. Yeah. I felt that, not the bewilderment part, but the sort of not knowing causing a lot of unrest. Freaked out about like, am I seeing people on the street that I'm related to and I don't realize,
Right.
and that type of a like when you don't
There.
know, that causing a lot of anxiety.
Well, you didn't want to date a brother
Yeah. Ugh,
or a nephew or a cousin or what have
yeah. Mm. Yeah.
you. All right. Well, we live in interesting times.
Yes. Yes. Well, it was great to talk to you. Like,
Likewise.
all right.
Thanks for helping me share my story.
Yeah. Of
And,
course.
and thanks for sharing yours with me.
Yeah. All right.
Bye
See
for
ya.
now.
Bye.
Okay, that was my conversation with Peter. Uprooted is available everywhere. I got my mom a copy, and she loved it and read it in a day, and it's in the mail to Burlington as we speak. So I'm really excited to read it. And I just want to say thanks to Peter for coming on and sharing his story. All right, I'll see you guys next. Well, I guess I won't see you. You'll hear from me next Thursday. All right, bye.